Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! It's me, Santa Claus. I've come back for Chapter 3 of our book, Miracle on 34th Street, Chapter 3. If you've missed Chapters 1 and 2, they are on the channel. You can watch those. Don't forget, if you like and subscribe it'll show up so that you'll know that the new chapters come out when they come out. But let's go ahead and get right into Chapter 3 of A Miracle on 34th Street, okay? Do you remember what happened last time? Well, we'll see what happens next. When she had finally managed to get the parade underway, Doris Walker, exhausted and frozen, returned to her apartment on Central Park West. The parade was passing right by the building, but Doris pushed through the crowd and entered without giving it so much as a glance. She didn't care if she never saw a parade again. All she wanted was a hot bath. Doris opened the door to her small and sternly modern apartment and called, "Susan! Susan!" But there was no reply. But Cleo, the maid, poked her head out of the kitchen and said that Susan was in Uncle Fred's apartment, watching the parade. Doris walked to the living room window and looked out. From her inside apartment, the only view was directly into the rear windows of the front apartment across the court. Doris rapped loudly on the glass, and in a moment Fred appeared at the opposite window. They waved a greeting, and Doris shouted that she'd be over in a little while. Uncle Fred was no relation of Susan's at all. Young and attractive, Fred Gailey was a lawyer with one of the city's oldest law firms. Being neighbors, he and Susan had become great pals, and out of this had grown a pleasant and casual friendship between Fred and Doris. It was far more casual than Fred would have liked, but Doris's first marriage had ended in divorce, and from her grim avoidance of any reference to it, Fred gathered that it had been a bitter disillusionment. At any rate, she seemed determined to avoid further entanglement. She was pleasant and friendly enough to Fred, but the real Doris would never emerge from her shell, even for a fleeting moment. Fred's apartment faced Central Park West, and from its windows he and Susan, a rather serious child of 6, had a perfect view of the gay and colorful parade. The sound of hand music and cheering children filled the air, but as usual, Fred was filled with much more childlike wonder and excitement than his little companion. As one of the huge inflated figures passed the window, Fred said eagerly, "That's Jack the Giant Killer, isn't it? And look, the great big fellow is the giant." "Of course," said little Susan. "There are no giants, really." "Maybe not now, Susan, but in the olden days." Susan just shook her head firmly. "People sometimes grow very tall, but that is abnormal. Mommy told me." Fred studied the child for a moment as she unexcitedly watched the parade. He couldn't help but feel sorry for her. True, she was intelligent, maybe too much so for a child of her age, but there was no gaiety about her. Fun was a stranger to Susan. "Maybe your mother's right," said Fred meekly, "but I believe in giants anyhow." Good for Fred. When Doris arrived, she launched into a caustic and detailed account of all of her troubles with the soused Santa. Fred tried to quiet her with gestures and grimaces, but it was no use. Finally, using a cup of coffee as a pretext, he dragged Doris into his tiny kitchenette and begged her not to expose all these disillusioning facts to her daughter. But Doris had very definite ideas about bringing up children. And then here's our next picture. Right here it says, "Of course," said little Susan, "there are no giants, really." And there's Fred, and there's little Susan. She doesn't believe in giants. That's sad. All right. She believed in utter realism and truth. Susan was certainly not going to be led to believe a lot of myths and legends, like Santa Claus, for example. "Oh, that's me." "Why not?" asked Fred. "What harm does it do?" "Oh, they grow up considering life as a big fairy tale instead of reality," Doris answered. "Subconsciously, they keep waiting for Prince Charming to come along, and when he does, it turns out to be..." "Look, Doris," Fred's voice was kindly, "you had a rough break. I'm not denying that. You loved someone deeply, you trusted him, and then one day you suddenly woke up and found out how wrong you'd been. But all men aren't like that, and I don't think Susan's going to be any happier growing up to think so." Doris turned away. Fred's directness had found its target. "I'm sorry," he went on, "but I'm right, Doris." He moved closer to her. "And I only wish you'd give me a chance to prove that I'm really the sort of person that, well, you hoped he was." "I burned my fingers once," said Doris. She turned back towards the living room, and Fred, with a hopeless shrug, followed. Oh, poor Fred. I think he likes Doris. So that's the end of Chapter 3. Short chapter, that one. That's okay. We'll have other ones tomorrow, the day after. We'll get through all 18 chapters of this book together. It'll be fun. So I want you to have a good Christmas if I don't see you before Christmas. If you need to have me read the other chapters, those are on the channel. Be sure to like and subscribe so you'll keep track of those. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.